cherry pick. So I'm not up here to just credit Michael Jordan. I think Michael Jordan transcended our game to a level that we all benefited from.
What the hell do you mean, Rich Paul, when you say Michael never had a 24-hour, 365 news cycle? He never had shows built strictly to criticize him. What shows are built strictly to criticize LeBron James? See, this is the BS. This is the BS. We cover the sport. It's a 24 hours news cycle. There are plenty of positive things that are said about LeBron James on every show. Every show. This is where the whining and moaning accusations come from him and his camp. What 24-hour, 365 news cycle has shows built strictly to criticize him? So in other words, the shows that criticize him never, ever, ever give him credit, huh? Ever. Look, man, I ain't got time. I'm not going to even waste my time with this. I'm going to get to my next guest. I'm going to get to my next guest right now. I'd like to welcome to the show none other than Mr. David Falk himself. Long time, buddy. How you doing, David? How's everything?
Good, Ashel. Delighted to be with this movie.
You said what you said. You've had an opportunity to reflect on what you had to say about LeBron James in comparison to Michael Jordan. The floor is yours. What would you like to say now?
Let me say at the outset, clearly LeBron James is a great player in any era. You'd be foolish to suggest otherwise. His longevity, his statistics are amazing. I think what makes Michael the GOAT goes way beyond the court. I think on the court, Michael obviated the center position. Prior to Jordan, you needed the Elijah Wans, the Ewings, the Querims, the Bob Lanairs. And the way Michael played, he made it unnecessary to have a great center. Look who he won the championship with: Bill Weddington, Dickie Simpkins, Bill Cartwright. And I think that had a huge impact on the game. Secondly, and perhaps even more importantly, I think Michael individually broke down every barrier that existed for professional basketball players, and in particular African-American professional basketball players, to become national marketing brand ambassadors. So the whole generation of LeBrons and Kobe's and Steph Curry's having their own shoes and being in commercials did not exist before Michael came in the game. Magic didn't have it. Bird didn't have it. Dr. J didn't have it. Kareem didn't have it. And I think that's a preponderant impact. I think third, I believe he's the first NBA player to become a billionaire. I believe he's the first NBA player to become a majority owner of an NBA team. And finally, he had a tremendous impact on fashion. He changed the look of the way the players play with the long shorts. He made bald as beautiful. And so I think beyond comparing statistics, who had more points, who averaged more, even who had more championships, I think Michael's impact is extremely broad and deep in what he did to change the game. I don't think any other player in history had that kind of an impact.
What do you make of people who would look, and I want to get far beyond those two individuals that we're talking about for the moment, but I got this one question to ask you. What do you make of folks and their assertions that the times that we're living in now, the advent of social media, the digital stratosphere, the microscope that is on players in today's game like never before, the impression is given that even the great Michael Jordan, with his unparalleled popularity, I compare him to no one. The only person I've ever compared him to was Michael Jackson, for crying out loud. That's how popular Michael Jordan was. When you listen to people talk today, they talk about the climate, the environment, the society that we're living in today, and they say it's far more invasive than it has ever been, which makes the road tougher for a guy like LeBron James compared to what Jordan had to endure during his playing career. You've been around a long time. You know this business like the back of your hand. What do you make of...
To the players, everyone can express their opinion. You don't have to work for a newspaper or a television station to have an opinion. But I think it's the natural tendency when you're the best at anything, there's a human tendency to try to tear people down. And certainly Michael had that because of his immense popularity. People criticize him, for example, for not being political enough. not expressing his desire for certain candidates. And so, sure, I think that the social media has changed the game. I also think if you want to be objective, the game has changed itself. I had this discussion about a month ago with Rod Thorne, who's a very dear friend of mine, who drafted Michael Jordan. And he said to me, which I didn't know, he said, do you realize today that the average NBA team takes 1/3 more shots than they did in Jordan's era? So when Jordan averaged 38 points a game, if you increase that by 1/3, that means he would average 52. Now, I think Michael could have averaged, and Michael took 1.7 threes per game. That's all he took. I think he could have averaged almost anything he wanted if that was what was required to win. That's all he cared about, was winning. And I think his record of 6 out of 6 is the greatest in the history of the NBA. Never lost the championship.
Well, don't forget, he also never allowed a championship series to get to a 7th game. He took you out in 6 or less every single time. That's the Michael Jordan that we're talking about here. David, expanding beyond Michael Jordan and LeBron James, when we think about the age that we're living in, one of the discussions your comments prompted was player empowerment and the kind of things that have taken place in today's NBA and in today's sports world. As an agent, looking at the state of affairs that exist, not just in the NBA, but professional sports, as it pertains to sovereignty involving players, player empowerment, et cetera, et cetera. What are the kind of thoughts that come to your mind as to what we're witnessing today and whether or not it's good or it's bad for the world of sports in this day and age?
Great question. So number one, I believe that great players, have always been empowered. I think the biggest difference between today's generation of players and, if you will, Jordan's generation, the Magic's generation, is how the players exercise the power. Now, if you understand that in 1982, that was a long time ago, the NBA ushered in a salary cap. And for the last 43 years, the players have essentially owned 50% of the revenues. So they're 50-50 partners with the league. The only way players can make more money is to grow the business of the NBA. Now, I believe that when players exercise their power poorly and they make statements that denigrate the game, I think that they're impeding the ability of themselves to make more money, which is foolish. So I'll give you a couple of examples. You want to talk about player empowerment? In 1984 and 1985, there were 2 players in the history of the game that opted out of the group licensing program. One was named Michael Jordan. One was named Patrick Ewing. They did not allow the league to use them in group licensing. And I opted out of both of them. You're not allowed to do that today. In 1985, Patrick Ewing became the first player in history to have an early termination option in his contract. He signed a 10-year deal for 3 times more money than Magic made the year before as a veteran. And he had the option to opt out after 6 years if market conditions change. That is empowerment. Michael Jordan was the first player to have a love of the game clause that did not require him to that allowed him to practice at North Carolina in the summer, which came to be known as the love of the game clause. Darnell Valentine in 1980 became the first player to challenge the league's ability under paragraph 13B to prevent players from doing endorsements or interviews without permission of the team. That's in every contract now, Valentine versus the Portland Trailblazers. So I could give you 100 examples of player empowerment. Patrick Ewing became the first rookie in history to be the highest paid player in the league. He made 55% more money than Querim, who's the highest paid veteran of all time. I believe that that's empowerment. Danny Ferry did the same thing in 1990, and he clearly was not one of the great players in the history of the league. So I believe that players in every sport have always had tremendous power, but I think that today, I don't think they use it as judiciously as they should if the goal is to make more money and grow the business.
Well, let me ask you this, David. Give me an example, if you can. If it's compromising, please don't bother. But if you can, give me an example of players that have exercised influence and exercised power, but you don't believe it's necessarily for their good or for the good of the game. Could you highlight an example that wouldn't be good to illustrate your point?
Well, so the simplest one I would say is traders. Okay. Now, I personally, the Patrick Ewing trade to Seattle, I didn't want to make it. I didn't believe in it, but he and the Knicks agreed it would be best to have a change of scenery. It was a 13-player trade. I traded Stephon Marbury in New Jersey in a 13-player trade with Sam Cassell. I did that behind the scenes. The minute you announce publicly as a player that you're not going to play anymore, Harden as an example, it makes it so much harder to make the trade for the exact reason that Rich Paul indicated is hard for LeBron, because you're shining the spotlight on the player, and the other teams around the league